Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Today I am joined with an exclusive interview with Ben Jacobs. Ben, we've just said Happy New Year, welcome to the United Stand in 2025 and thank you so much for joining us in this January transfer window.
Absolute pleasure. Happy New Year to you, the team, and of course all the Manchester United fans listening, wishing the team and every individual much success and health for the year ahead.
Well, it's looking good so far, Ben. It's looking good so far. Liverpool, good results. And obviously Arsenal in the FA Cup, a fantastic result for Ruben Amorim. But the most important thing, a lot of Man United fans will say, is that Ruben Amorim is backed. We're hearing a lot about PSR and financial fair play playing a big factor in Manchester United's January transfer window activity. Do you see Manchester United making signings this window?
I do. I think it's not quite as simple as needing the outgoings to fund the incomings within a set window, because you've got to look also at the first half of the summer window. So there's a little bit more flexibility. If, for example, their net spend saw them bring in and spend more than they sold, they would still ultimately have the first part of the summer window and ultimately roughly a 6-week period, which is a near miss window in which to balance the books. And therefore, there is a little bit of flexibility there. But generally, in this financial year, Manchester United do need to bring in some fees. And then it's about backing Ruben Amorim. As you say, we know that they're looking for a young left-back profile. If Marcus Rashford is loaned, if Alejandro Garnacho is sold, if Antony departs, even one of those three, they'll be looking for a versatile, wide goal scorer or winger. And then, of course, there's that longer-term aim, probably more for the summer, to try and look for another number 9. And then I'm sure we'll talk about Casemiro as well. Should he depart, there's a chance that a midfielder comes in. So maybe 1 or 2 in January to back Ruben Amorim, and some of the bigger names that we'll come on to, probably more ones to watch for the summer.
Yes, that's I think how a lot of Manchester United fans are feeling. I think a lot of Man United fans are just a little bit worried that we might sit back and do nothing in January. But we are seeing that potentially Rashford, Casemiro, Antony, even Garnacho could be on the way out. So we will talk about that. But I want to firstly ask you, you speak about a striker more long-term for the summer, but there has been rumours about Manchester United going in for Kolo Muani on loan in January. Is that something that it looks like Manchester United will advance on?
They've certainly explored it. I think you've got Juventus, and if Dusan Vlahovic leaves, they're very serious about Kolo Muani, and then Spurs. Kolo Muani is Tottenham's top target, and Manchester United are probably third at the moment out of 3 credible suitors. And the reason for that is, as of now, on a Monday morning, 13th of January, PSG want loan with obligation or straight sale, and they value Kolo Muani at over £50 million. So Manchester United's perspective is, yes, they could bring in a Kolo Muani on a loan with an option or a straight loan and then decide on him and or still move for another striker in the summer. But the obligation is a stumbling block, as is PSG's valuation. So as of now, Manchester United don't like the formula that PSG are offering. Now, if Kvaratskhelia comes in, and even though they're different positions, PSG feel that they've got another goal scorer or goal contributor, maybe the Kolo Muani fee drops if a solution's not found. Or maybe later in the window, there is a possibility of a loan with an option or a straight loan. But as long as it stays loan with obligation or just a permanent straight deal, then Manchester United are less inclined to move now, whereas Tottenham and Juventus are more active. So this is one to watch, because there is a possibility Kolo Muani and Manchester United gathers legs, but the formula of a deal will have to change first in the last 3 weeks of the window.
That's very interesting, because I'm one of them Manchester United fans that's like, oh, I'll take him on a loan, but if you tell me I have to pay 50 million for him at the end of the loan, I'm not 100%, because I don't know how he'd perform. But I would take that risk, and maybe Manchester United are expecting something similar in regards to Marcus Rashford, which we will speak about in a second. But just keeping on PSG, we know that they're active in terms of trying to get Cavara in their January transfer window, get him into PSG. They could maybe need to sell players potentially, and Manchester United have looked at Nuno Mendes. Now, we're hearing that is one for the summer, but is that a target that Manchester United are really exploring, trying to get in for Ruben Amorim?
Yeah, Nuno Mendes, he was given his debut at Sporting by Amorim. Of course, Hugo Viana, who's off to Man City, also highly rates the player as well, and they might be looking for a fullback in the summer too. I'm told by those who are close to Mendes that although the player is interested in a move and would be willing to move mid-season, it's extremely difficult because PSG's position is very firm at the moment that they don't want to let the player go in January. So an astronomical offer could change that, or the player agitating for a move. But at the moment, Nuno Mendes is looking very difficult for January, but very possible heading into the summer. And Manchester United are looking at a series of profiles: Dorgu, Mendes, Kerkos, as I exclusively broke now about 7 or 8 months ago for Manchester United and Chelsea. But a lot of these names are not necessarily available right now. So again, they might have to just wait until the summer, look for a stopgap. In terms of stopgaps, I'm still told that Ben Chilwell is not an option for Manchester United, even on a loan, even if Chelsea pay 50% of the wages. It's not a deal that they really seriously looked at over the summer, and they're not prepared to revisit it at this stage either, because they want a younger kind of profile. And the thing about Chilwell is that if Manchester United moved, it would probably only be a straight loan or one with an option, because they know, again, that a fit Luke Shaw plus a new young left back in the summer, and suddenly whoever they bring in with more experience at left back, if they're permanent, is going to fall to at least third in the pecking order. And at that stage, you've got one too many in your squad, or you've got an unhappy player. So this is why Chilwell and Manchester United hasn't really progressed. But I think Nuno Mendes is one of about 3 or 4 on their list of young left backs, but summer more likely than January.
And then in terms of Diego Leon, who you've just spoken about, he's signing his 4-year deal with Manchester United today, I think, that you put out there just before this show. Do you know if he is intended to come into the first team squad?
Well, at this stage, he's only 17, so he signs the 4-year deal, he goes back, and then the first opportunity to bring him into the fold is in the summer. And my understanding is that the aim is to use him in pre-season to assess and then decide whether, for example, there might be another loan back, or, of course, a loan to a different club in Europe to get him minutes. Right now, I think they feel he needs a little bit more development. So I don't think we're going to see too many first team opportunities in 2025. But the first consideration is assessing him pre-season and seeing where he is, because 17, 18, 19-year-olds can move and develop very quickly. And we've seen already from Ruben Amorim that he's prepared to back youth. So Manchester United do feel he has the capability to acclimatise and develop quickly, but the likelihood is he won't get that many first team minutes in 2025. And if that is still their conclusion after pre-season, then you start to look for a loan in the summer and to bring him back in 2026.
Interesting stuff. I wanted to ask that question because I know a lot of people are excited about him, but he is only young, and I do think we need a more senior left back, which obviously Manchester United are looking at, like you've spoken about there. In terms of, let's get on to outgoings before we move maybe towards summer targets. In terms of outgoings, Marcus Rashford's the first one I want to ask you about. He's been linked to numerous different clubs, some of which have already been dispelled, for example, Como, but some of which really do seem to have some legs and some substance to it, like AC Milan. Where is Marcus Rashford at in terms of leaving Manchester United and the status of that deal? Because obviously Ruben Amorim left him out again yesterday for the Arsenal squad.
Yeah, and at this stage, you start to think you're protecting your asset, because it's one thing leaving a player out for a few games, but even when he came back for that one match, he still didn't get any minutes. So at this stage, with the window open and only a few weeks left, if you think there's a possibility that he'll leave, whether temporarily or permanently, you're not always removing the player for a tactical decision. Sometimes it's a financial consideration to make sure you're protecting your asset. Look at somebody like Evan Ferguson. He picked up another injury. Nicholas Füllkrug, the same. So clubs maybe that are looking to move on a player or replace a player are forced with a situation if they pick up an injury where they can't. And then that changes your dynamic. And I think that Manchester United are not just being cautious with Rashford because at the moment it looks like there's a realistic possibility of an exit. They're also thinking about the finances, and there's no point in yet, should he stay at Manchester United, giving him that opportunity to start games or play now, just in case there's a late suitor. And what if he pulled up with something and then it changes the dynamic? And that's a lot of wage to pay if the player wants out and ultimately was to be sidelined. As of now, there's two kind of considerations to this. One is Rashford, who my understanding is he's leaning towards going abroad. And two is Manchester United. And what are they prepared to cede on a deal, especially if it's temporary? And the more that they cede to, i.e. paying his wages or making an overall package performance related, so taking a bit more of a gamble as to what they may or may not be paid, the more they give, the bigger the pool of suitors. And that suggests that in the long run, they don't only want to find a solution now, but like with Jadon Sancho, they may be looking for a permanent exit, and perhaps they just can't get that 45 million or more that they would ideally be hoping for now. So then you start saying, okay, could it be a straight loan? Could it be a loan with an option? Are Manchester United going to contribute to the wages? Are Manchester United going to have a lower wage fee and then a higher number, probably double the loan fee? That's the sort of standard that's related to how the team performs or how Rashford perform. And the more that they include in this area, the more likely it is that more suitors come forward. So as of now, we have Milan, but we should be very clear here that Milan cannot, because of a new Brexit rule in Serie A, sign 2 English players in the same window. So it either has to be Kyle Walker or Marcus Rashford. And although Milan are active on both deals, their preference and their push and their confidence at the moment anyway is all around Kyle Walker. And therefore, if he signs, it takes Milan out of the equation. You have Dortmund, who will almost certainly, if they approach Manchester United, they've only gone to the player side at the moment, ask for a very similar deal to their own loan for Jadon Sancho, which again was a loan that had a smaller fee and allowed Manchester United to cover the wages with a combination of Dortmund paying a portion and the actual loan fee. And then Manchester United moved into profit because Dortmund qualified for the Champions League final. So it's that kind of creative structure that maybe works for all parties. So they're one to watch. Rashford would be very keen on Barcelona. It's difficult for them to register players and do deals financially at the moment. But if they get their act together in terms of the structure and the finances, then Rashford would definitely have an appetite to go to Barcelona for the second half of the season. And then at the moment, Monaco are not advancing. Como haven't made any approach. That's my understanding anyway. I obviously respect the reports of others. And then West Ham United, one to watch. But interestingly, the feeling with West Ham is that Rashford wants to go abroad. And that, again, is why at the moment they haven't approached Manchester United. The only concrete offer to Manchester United came from central Saudi deal makers, and probably with Al Ahly in mind, although 3 different clubs had expressed an interest, and it was shot down very quickly. The other 2 clubs, by the way, Al Nassr and Al Qadsiya, and the Rashford camp felt that they can get another opportunity in Europe if he ends up leaving Manchester United. So Saudi's off the table. Europe is most likely, and we still can't categorically rule out staying at Manchester United. But as of now, the Rashford camp are actively exploring an exit, and they're doing so with the belief that Manchester United will sanction some kind of loan deal.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting, because when I saw all of the clubs that were interested in coming out into the media, I was thinking, when can we do the deal then? Because it does feel like there's a lot of talk around it, but is there actually any substance to any sort of deal? But it looks like there, like you said, with the Milan one, that was maybe a little bit, people got overexcited that deal was going to happen, and now that Kyle Walker's in the equation, it might not go ahead. So it's something to look at. And with Barcelona, are they actively interested in getting Marcus Rashford? Is that something they'd want to do if the finances were in place?
Yeah, they would like to do the deal. And actually, they were looking at the possibility dating back to November of last year. But the priority for Barcelona is ultimately fulfilling the La Liga obligations that they have now met. So their squad cost control has been increased, which in layman's terms means that they can spend more money. And now we wait and see whether they can move their finances around. And some may depend on Rashford. So to give you an example, using Raheem Sterling, when he moved from Chelsea to Arsenal, he made a slight wage reduction. And then there was roughly a 50-50 split between the clubs, or maybe actually a bit closer to 60-40 in Chelsea's favour. So the consideration for Barcelona, if they move, will be to understand if Manchester United are prepared to pay the majority of the wages. And if not, then that move doesn't look particularly viable. The other thing that I would say, and this is where the Sterling Arsenal example is useful, even though it's nothing to do with Manchester United, in this kind of scenario, whether it's January or the summer, the buyer will often wait until very late and intentionally. And as a fan, you can kind of say, nothing's happening. How? There's loads of suitors. It should just resolve itself. But January is a seller's market. So as a buyer, you're going to be told one thing at the beginning of the window, and you as a buyer may have the urgency, and the seller will stick to their guns. Napoli are saying 80 million for Kvaratskhelia, Brighton are saying, we've not decided on Evan Ferguson. Chelsea are saying, Renato Vega has to be a permanent sale. Manchester United are saying, if you want to buy Rashford, then it's 45 million or more. If you want to take Casemiro, you got to pay us a fee, not just take the wage off the books. When you get into the last week of the window or so, it flips. And that seller maybe that's either bluffed or taken a very bullish position starts to sweat a little bit because, oh, look, Milan might get Kyle Walker and they're no longer in the race for Rashford. Then maybe Manchester United think the pool of suitors is diminishing, time is ticking, and then it flips in a January window and the buyer gets ascendancy. So what appears to be inaction can sometimes be tactic. And keep an eye on that. Clubs that maybe want Rashford that just say, we're going to wait. We're going to let Manchester United and Rashford sweat for a few more days. Then we're going to make our final offer and see whether we can get a better deal out of it. And that is kind of how the January window works. 3 weeks are basically seller having a lot more control. And then the last week, it flips a bit more in favour of the buyer.
I think that's a great explanation that a lot of people in the chat will appreciate, and it's something to watch deadline day, even particularly in terms of late moves or something like that for Manchester United. And in terms of other moves that Manchester United can make, Casemiro and Antony are two names I did want to bring up to you because these are exits that Manchester United are looking at as well. Casemiro, a lot of talk about him potentially moving to the Saudi Pro League and maybe Ronaldo's involvement with that. And Antony, links to Real Betis continuously. People think that's more likely to be a loan at this stage. Have you got an update on any of them two cases for Manchester United?
Yeah, Antony Betis, if it does come off, will definitely be a loan. They're certainly not looking for any kind of permanent move, and finances are obviously a part of that. Betis are basically being opportunistic, and we wait and see whether that materialises. There is some interest in Antony from Saudi Arabia as well, but more likely, I'm told, for the summer than January. And regarding Casemiro, I think we have to be very clear here in what is a complicated story, because once again, if you don't know the Saudi market, you don't always follow along with the story. Number one, central Saudi deal makers through the sporting director Michael Emenalo, ex-Chelsea, negotiate these deals. Then, secondly, once they get player buy-in, they go to the club. Before they get player buy-in, the club is often completely in the dark. That was certainly the case, for example, with the signings of Neymar and Alexander Mitrovic from Fulham. Then at the same time, the clubs have got their own sporting directors. So sometimes what you find is centrally and within the clubs, they've got different ideas. And if you add Ronaldo into the mix and him taking an opinion, you actually have three different voices here. What Ronaldo wants, what Al Nassr wants, and what the central deal makers want. And an example of that, again, non-Manchester United, is Ivan Toney, where Al Ahly and Matthias Jassel, the manager, wanted a left winger, a holding midfielder, or a left back, and they got Ivan Toney. And they love Ivan Toney and his goals, but it was not the position that they asked for. So Al Nassr are on record as denying that anything is near done or advanced with Casemiro. And that is true to my understanding. And yet at the same time, he has a central offer, which has not been allocated yet to a specific club. But people are assuming it's Al Nassr because it's true that Ronaldo would ideally like Casemiro. And also Al Nassr are one of the only Saudi clubs at the moment that have got squad space, because many of the PIF clubs have got their quotas full. So it's logical to think that if anyone's going to sign a big foreigner in January, it's probably going to be Al Nassr. Talisca's first got to get to Turkey. It's not done yet. Laporte, some say, might move back to Europe and Real Madrid, and he'd be open to that. He said last year that if Real want him, then of course he would take that call and potentially accept. But again, we're not there yet. Interestingly, Real were in Saudi when they lost the Spanish Super Cup. So Florentino Perez will have had the opportunity to talk to Saudi deal makers if that does progress. And it is still an if at this stage. And then Al Nassr will have squad space. But right now, every Saudi club basically has to move around players either by selling them or deregistering them, or there's no ability at this stage for them to bring in Casemiro. So it's very normal that a player has an offer, and that's true with Casemiro. It's worth about $650,000 a week. It's a 3-year contract. Saudi deal makers would be prepared to offer Manchester United something in the region of 30 million euros, but none of that means anything unless they can find a club to allocate him to, or there's player buy-in. And we're not there yet with allocating the club, even though it's thought that it might be Al Nassr, and Casemiro hasn't yet given any green light either. So this again could progress as the window develops, but as of now, Casemiro to Saudi is not as close to my understanding as some have implied.
Interesting stuff. And then just to touch on the Antony Saudi interest, I know you said more towards the summer and it's not anything developed. Do you know if that's something that Antony would be interested in? Because obviously you've got to have the players' approval as well.
Yeah, at this stage, it's hard to tell because the offer hasn't been made yet, but an expression of interest was made by 2 different Saudi clubs to the central deal makers to explore the possibility of Antony, born out of the fact that Manchester United might be open to a sale. But as you say, he's only 24 years of age, so we have to wait and see whether he would be open to that move. Sometimes what happens is that the Saudis don't ask the player outright. They instead make the offer first. And I know that sounds strange, but Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Neymar, Daniel Podence, who moved to Al-Shabaab from Wolves, they basically all woke up one morning and there was an email and there was an offer. So it doesn't work the same as it does here, where you often forewarn. Like someone listening may remember the exclusive I broke when Al-Shabaab agreed a verbal deal with Newcastle for Miguel Almiron and the player said no. And again, the player's agent was completely in the dark because they'd gone to Newcastle through their relationships, PIF, even though Shabab is a non-PIF club. They'd done the deal and then they dropped an offer out of nowhere to Almiron. And the reason sometimes they do that is firstly because the actual power of the finances can be quite overwhelming. Like imagine if you had a job and it was either you turn up for an interview and you think, actually, I'm not sure. I quite like my existing job at the United Stand, so I'm not going to go to that interview. Or alternatively, the other employer just emailed you an astronomical salary and then said, do you want to come for an interview? You might be like, hang on a minute. If Mark Goldbridge wasn't such an amazing boss, it's the kind of thing that you might consider because the finances are so overpowering that it feels like they're making you the offer before your interview. And that's kind of the Saudi tactic. They try and overwhelm you with an incredible opportunity before they've even pitched it to you in some cases. And then at the same time, they're hoping that the buzz, the money, and the quickness with which they want you to join forces you to make that snap decision. And they have a very good success rate of that. So if they were to approach Antony, it would be the same as everybody else. You've often only got 48 hours to make a decision. Otherwise, the offer gets pulled off the table. But as of now, we can't speak to Antony's intents because we're not yet at that point. Because before you get to the point of the formal offer being made, there has to be an appetite from clubs. So as I say, there's 2 clubs that have expressed an interest in Antony. One is Al Qadsiya and one is Al Ali. And once the central deal makers know that that expression of interest is there, we have to wait and see whether they think there's logic in them making any kind of offer. And I think if anything happens, it will be at the earliest this summer rather than in January.
Yeah, they can forward the email onto me and I'll forward it to Mark and say, it's got to double it, mate. But look, Ben, no, it's really interesting to hear how all that works. And I think for Manchester United, it'd be super beneficial because obviously Casemiro and Antony are 2 players that don't really look like they have a future right now. And we have paid astronomical fees for in the past. That would be great to move on if that can happen. But like you said, a lot has to be done. It's a domino effect to get to that point. Moving towards, I wanted to ask you about summer targets. In terms of names that have been thrown out there for Manchester United, there's one particular that I wanted to ask you about because it's been rumoured, but there's nothing really been concrete. Is it true that Manchester United might be interested in Mbeumo of Brentford, or have you heard anything along the lines of that?
Yeah, Brentford don't want to sell. That's the first thing. Newcastle are the only club that have actually made any concrete kind of approach. No bid for January, but they're looking at Mbeumo over the summer. I think the links with Mbeumo actually go all the way back to John Murtagh rather than necessarily through Dan Ashworth or now Jason Wilcox. But what we can say is that when Ashworth was still at Newcastle, he was looking at Mbeumo. So it's logical to maybe think that Dan Ashworth, when he was still at the football club, had put Mbeumo into the mix. But I'm not aware that that's been taken forwards by Jason Wilcox, Omar Barada, or any of the recruitment team. Mbeumo is going to be in demand naturally. I think Johan Wissa will have some suitors as well. It's incredible when you think that Brentford lost Ivan Toney, and I think they're the 3rd top goal scorers in the Premier League, but nothing yet on my radar with Manchester United and Brian Mbeumo, other than to point out that Newcastle like him and they liked him when Dan Ashworth was still there. And obviously Dan Ashworth ends up coming to Manchester United. So sometimes those targets kind of migrate across. I think that's the same, by the way, with Tyler Dibbling as well at Southampton, who is concretely on Manchester United's radar, very early stages, no approach, nothing likely to be possible in January. And that's actually down to the player, because even though Southampton look like they're heading down, he's very settled. Dibbling went to Cobham and then back to Southampton, and he didn't enjoy being in that pressure cooker where there was heavy competition and maybe the coaching and the development wasn't as hands-on at Southampton. So he's quite a shy kid. And Newcastle, again, with the club really pushing for Dibbling, he's still on their radar. And once again, when Ashworth came to Manchester United, that's another name proposed. But unlike Mbeumo, that hasn't advanced yet, maybe that changes over the summer. But right now, nothing to get excited about as far as I'm aware. But Dibbling, they are seriously looking at, because they, Manchester United and Newcastle and several other teams, mostly in England, because I don't think he'll make a European move. They feel that this kid has got a high ceiling, is only going to get better, is only going to get more confident, and will be available in the summer. So that is one to watch.
Thank you for that, Ben. In terms of that sort of position, before I move on to the strikers, I forgot to ask you about this, so I'll bring it in now because it kind of is the same sort of position. Alejandro Garnacho, rumours that he could be on his way out of Manchester United, with Amorim maybe not seeing him super suitable to his system. And Napoli apparently of interest, Atletico Madrid of interest. Would Manchester United be open to selling him, first of all? And is that a genuine possibility in January or the summer?
So I'll tell you a funny story, although I'm not going to attribute it to an individual out of respect. But Garnacho and Atleti is a non-starter, I'm told. And even though there is deep appreciation for him as a player from Diego Simeone, the Atleti board still haven't really forgiven him for the manner of the exit. And several sources, and I'm going to call these multiples so as to not give away even the kind of person or people that have said this, but several people have told me within Atleti that Garnacho carries the nickname currently Gazpacho, which is a cold soup. And it's basically because when he left, they felt that he was dispassionate, he didn't care, he was disrespectful at times. And that is one side. And of course, the player will have another perspective. So we should take that with a pinch of salt. But there's still a bit of tension and friction between Garnacho and Atleti. And as a consequence, I'm told that that is basically a non-starter, even though, interestingly, Diego Simeone really likes the player. And of course, he was there between 2015 and 2020 before he ended up going to Manchester United. So I don't think that return is possible unless something dramatically changes. There's definitely some bridge building between Garnacho and senior figures at Atletico Madrid, if that one is to gather pace, even though, as I say, we should point out that Diego Simeone is really impressed by the player's potential and development since leaving. Napoli could have legs, but we're not there yet. So we should contextualize this and say that Kvicha Kvaratskhelia is likely to join PSG. There is, of course, Premier League interest, but PSG, the only side negotiating at the moment. And PSG are growing in optimism that this is going to be a deal that's possible for potentially as high as 80 million euros all in, but maybe actually 5 or 10 million cheaper. And certainly the guaranteed fee that PSG are looking to pay is more around the 60 to 70 million mark. And then we wait and see what the add-ons are if a deal is agreed and whether they're easy or difficult to reach. And suddenly, if Kvaratskhelia goes, which was not Napoli's original intent mid-season, but they are prepared to sanction a sale, you have a situation where they're going to need to spend some of that money and bring in a replacement. And this is where the links with Garnacho come from. So the Napoli interest may prove to be genuine, but we're not there yet. But Manchester United's position is very much they value Garnacho. They still feel that he's got a role to play. Of course, he hasn't been as integral yet under Ruben Amorim, but it's early stages. And I think he's been challenged to show his worth at Manchester United. So I don't think we're looking at a transfer list style situation. I certainly don't think we're looking at Manchester United offering him actively in January to clubs. But if the right offer comes, then it may be given some kind of consideration. Now, we hear some reports in Italy that quote right number might be 50 million euros. That's not my understanding. I'm told by Manchester United sources that any valuation of Garnacho is significantly north of that 50 million euros number. So I don't think we're looking at Manchester United forcing him out. I don't think we're looking at the player desperately looking for a move in January. But do keep an eye on Napoli if the Kvaratskhelia deal comes off, because they might want to spend some of that money, but they might have to spend almost all of that money if they were to get a Garnacho deal now in January over the line, because I'm still told that Manchester United's valuation of Garnacho is pretty high.
I think that would be right of Manchester United to have him with quite a high valuation when you look at other figures that players are going for around Europe, especially of his age. And then in terms of Garnacho, we've spoken about, but another player that got put out there, maybe into the same bracket that they will listen to offers for, that shocked a lot of people because he's starting regular games for Ruben Amorim and has come through the academy. He's Kobbie Mainoo. Is any of the rumours about him potentially being there for a sale, are they true?
Well, I'll bring calm first of all before I ramble on, which is to say Kobbie Mainoo wants to stay at Manchester United. So, of course, there is interest in a player like that. And until you get a new deal, not only does the player have leverage, but there will be suitors. And Chelsea admire Kobbie Mainoo. There's no denying that, but they've not made any kind of approach yet as of now with a view to January. And I'm still told that Kobbie Mainoo will give prioritisation to Manchester United in trying to agree a new deal. And Manchester United will be very bullish about negotiating with Kobbie Mainoo rather than listening to offers. So only if it got to the point where Kobbie Mainoo negotiated, couldn't agree a deal, said he wanted to leave, then you have to start looking in the slightly longer term as to a certain market, whether that's summer or whether that's next year, to start thinking about how you can recoup the fee. But that's a doomsday scenario of which, at the moment, we have no evidence, because it's the exact opposite. Mainoo wants to stay at Manchester United. Manchester United wants to renew him. Ruben Amorim rates the player. He's integral to the project. He's the right age. He's the right profile. So unless anything astronomical comes or Mainoo changes his mind, then it feels at the moment like we're dealing in the currency of leverage, whereby the Chelsea interest is there and it is genuine. And now Manchester United have to engage with Mainoo to make sure that he's given an appropriate new deal. And that's my understanding, that although no significant progress has been made at the time of recording, Manchester United intend to renew Mainoo, and Mainoo wants to stay at Manchester United. So logically, unless they hit a significant stumbling block over something like finances or the structure of the deal, it will eventually get done. And that would be my prediction at this stage. But like I said a moment ago, we're not in any kind of advanced stage yet with Kobbie Mainoo, and we might have to wait a number of weeks or months before we get there. It's quite unusual to be negotiating and signing a new deal with a player when the window is open. I think this is also why with Matheus Cunha, there's a verbal agreement over a new deal. It's not signed as of now, because if you're Cunha, you might want to wait a week or two in January and just see whether somebody surprisingly comes for you in this window. But there's no real need at the moment, I don't think, for Manchester United as a club to be panicking about a Mainoo exit. They could turn and approach away anyway in January, and I would expect them to do that. But the priority now is to get Mainoo to renew. So there's maybe an element of, I wouldn't quite call it agitation, but opportunism, whereby the Mainoo camp have seen the Ahmad deal get done. And they're probably thinking to themselves, that was quicker and more advanced than our deal. So you start to wonder how you can use leverage just to make sure that Manchester United start that process of tying Mainoo down. And that's the player's ideal dream, just to stay at Manchester United. So I don't see a scenario where anybody succeeds, even if they try, in prizing Kobbie Mainoo away from Manchester United in the next two windows.
I love that. I think it's obviously just trying to find a wage where it's Manchester United are comfortable with it and the player feels valued. So hopefully that does get done. And then in terms of Ruben Amorim, his plans for Manchester United transfers in. I mean, have you heard anything about maybe preferential positions he would like to look at? And also striker-wise, I quickly wanted to ask before we wrap up, because I know you are very busy. Gyökeres and Osimhen do seem to be two names that keep popping up. Have you heard anything around them two looking towards the summer?
Yeah, Amorim's assessing the positions, and of course it's very collaborative. So unlike Erik ten Hag, he doesn't have a veto per se, but his input is going to prove very valuable. We know they want that young left-back profile, and Lyon's arrival doesn't change that, because as I said before, it may well be that there's a little bit more time needed before he has the opportunity to gain significant, at least Premier League minutes. And with Luke Shaw, unfortunately, recovering and then picking up another injury, I think they want that second kind of fullback to compete with Luke Shaw, and that's not quite Leon yet. So left back's going to be one position. Then it's logical to think, even if it's not in January and possibly not in the summer, that centre-back will still become quite high on the priority list because Maguire's deal's only been triggered by a year. And they might want to bring in a young centre-back, knowing that after Maguire leaves, and at the moment that's 2026, they have a sort of teenager that can come through and compete with the existing centre-backs. But of course, they did bring in both Lenny Yoro and Matthias de Ligt. It doesn't mean that they won't look for one more in the next 1 to 3 windows, but I don't think it's as urgent a priority. A number 2 goalkeeper, Bayindir obviously now has won a lot of plaudits and fans, and rightly so. He was man of the match in that FA Cup win over Arsenal. But the challenge with the number 2 goalkeeper is the better they do, as we see with Kelleher, and the more plaudits they win, the more they want to be a number 1. And I'm not sure that Manchester United can guarantee that Premier League game time. So it'd be interesting in the summer whether he just puts himself in the shop window and forces Manchester United to bring in a number 2, or whether he does actually wish to now just stay at the football club, and maybe a run in the FA Cup changes the player's perspective. But number 2 goalkeeper could be a possibility. And then again, everything else is sort of a moving part, because as I said right at the beginning of the show, if, for example, Antony, Garnacho and Rashford were all to go, then of course they need an attack-minded wide player. Tyler Dibbling, I've already mentioned, one of many possibilities. And then up front, a number 9 as well. So you've kind of got the spine of a team. I don't think that central midfield is as much of a priority. I don't think a box-to-box midfielder is. If Mason Mount gets fit, then a central attacking midfielder could be a role that he grows into. So wide forwards or wingers, traditional number 9, left back, number 2 goalkeeper, possibly a young centre back. But I mean this over the next probably 1 to 3 windows rather than all in January or specifically in the summer. And then regarding your question on the names, Victor Osimhen is a Manchester United dream target, but financially it's very difficult, even with that release clause dropping to 75 million euros. Nothing is possible in January. And Osimhen, even though this might sound strange, has not changed his mind. He still wants his next move to be permanent. So the whole nearly joined Chelsea, nearly joined Saudi, didn't get either, went temporarily to Turkey, hasn't made the player think, maybe I ought to contemplate a loan with an option. Victor Osimhen is saying, if you want me, you sign me permanently, whether at that 75 million euros release clause or a different kind of package like a loan with an obligation. Add to that 250k a week, and Manchester United may find that difficult. So it reminds me a bit of when they wanted Kane idealistically, but practically and financially, it wasn't possible because they were not given the same kind of finances or deal by Daniel Levy as Bayern Munich were. But they may explore that over the summer. A lot will just depend on what kind of package Napoli are prepared to give and whether Osimhen changes his mind about, for example, joining Manchester United on a loan with an option. What we can say is that before he moved to Napoli, Victor Osimhen had an offer from Manchester United. And at that time, Ighalo was at the club, and he went to Ighalo and he said, is this the right move for me? And Ighalo said, no, you'll be too far down the pecking order. You won't get the pathways necessary. So Osimhen instead chose to go to Napoli, but he nearly joined Manchester United before he moved to Napoli. So the links have been there for a long period of time. Victor Gyökeres is obviously going to draw links with Manchester United because of the Ruben Amorim factor. And I think if the manager had a say, he'll be a target and a profile that is put forward to the recruitment team. The good news with Gyökeres is that it's not release clause or nothing. It's also a 75 million euros deal. And right now, I think it is more likely, if I had to pick one or the other, that Manchester United would enter the race for Gyökeres than Osimhen, only because the Gyökeres package, the agent fees, the wages, all significantly lower than Osimhen. So he is a little bit more cost effective, but we're a little bit premature to be talking about either at this stage because Manchester United haven't made an approach to either club. They're still determining what kind of big number 9 they might be looking for in terms of outlay, cost, profile. And obviously Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee, who wants to stay at the football club, have still got the opportunity to influence the situation as well. Remember, if you look at Chelsea, they had Nicholas Jackson. Everyone was adamant they were going to sign a striker in the last window, in the window before. But in the end, they stuck with Jackson, and his numbers ended up being good last season and are very strong this season as well. So this is why Manchester United are not committing to going all in on either target yet, because maybe by the end of the season, they'll have goal scorers within their team they don't currently have now, and that will change their perspective. But as I say, it's only my prediction. But right now, I hear more that Manchester United would like to explore the conditions for Gyökeres than Osimhen, because they feel that Gyökeres is not only a player the manager knows incredibly well, but he's also one that's going to be more cost effective.
And then lastly, Ben, is there anything else, any other names that you think that we should be watching for Manchester United? And Inacio, I did see a little thing that he could be available on a loan obligation to buy. He's obviously played under Amorim before. I didn't know if they were just putting 2 and 2 together there, or if Manchester United were really actually looking at that.
No, they've looked at Gonzalo Ignacio. Again, it depends on the deal, because the price has always been astronomical. I would throw Ousmane Diomande in there for both Chelsea and Manchester United. This is another €100 million player where the price might drop during the summer. I don't think we can categorically rule out Jared Branthwaite, although there's nothing to suggest that Everton's price has dropped or will drop during the summer. It'll be interesting with Mark Gahey, who Manchester United looked at under John Murtough, but not under this current regime. Does that price drop because he's only got 18 months left on his deal? It's only Chelsea that are exploring the deal for now. So we can only term Manchester United's interest as historical. Then you've got Dorgu, who I mentioned before, the young left back, another name of 3 or 4 at the moment that Manchester United might look to progress with in the summer. But somebody could move for him now, and then that might force Manchester United's hand a little bit, which would present an interesting scenario. Do they enter that race in January because they're forced to at probably 35 or 40 million euros, or do they wait until the summer? And then come the summer, Milos Kerkez, who's got a new agent, is very likely to be available. I think Bournemouth at the moment would want £45 million or something in that ballpark, but that might drop by 6 or 7 million come the summer. So there is an element of stick or twist between backing Amorim now to try and get a trophy, get some kind of European football by going on a run in the second half of the season, and just being patient because it's a new recruitment team, it's a new manager, and several of the targets that they really are serious about simply won't be available until the summer.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate that. And I know you touched on the Mainoo stuff, but we've just got a super chat in here, so I thought I'd ask it. He said, BD Destroy says, is it true that Mainoo wants 200k a week?
I don't think they're at that stage at the moment. I don't think you're talking about a greedy player either. The perspective of most players when they renew is an increase naturally, but also potentially a sliding scale of incremental further increases, which is the case, for example, at Cole Palmer and Chelsea. So they know that they not only have one wage, but they have an additional wage if 2-3 seasons in, they're doing well, they hit certain personal targets, then you don't have to go back and keep renegotiating. So an incentive-driven structure is basically what this new sporting-led regime are offering. And from Mainoo's point of view, I think he just wants to be one of the top 10 best paid players at the football club. And any regular starter, in my opinion anyway, is entitled to ask for that. The other thing that we need to be careful about is that when you hear numbers, you're hearing a negotiated number usually anyway based on parity. And by parity for Manchester United, I mean it's framed contractually, usually anyway, around the club having European or Champions League football. And then in the seasons that you don't, there's roughly a 15 to 20% reduction for players that are part of that incentive-driven structure. So right now, every Manchester United player is on a decrease because there's no Champions League football. And you may remember when Ronaldo exited, that was one of his big bugbears because his numbers in the season before he left, when Man United didn't qualify for the Champions League, were outstanding. And yet his wage still went down because that's the kind of structure that Manchester United have always had under the Glazers, and it will continue under Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his new sporting team. So 200k for Mainoo with Champions League football might be a number that he aspires to, including bonuses, but I don't really think they're in a room going back and forth on that yet. But one thing's for sure, the wage as of now in this season for every new signing or every renewal will be less, and it will continue to be less until the point comes when Manchester United re-qualify again for Champions League football.
Ben, thank you so much for everything that you've told us today. I really do appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We love having you on the channel. Hopefully, we can get some more news from you during the window as well, and obviously across the season. But thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Keep up the good work and enjoy the rest of the window, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. Well, everyone, that was Ben Jacobs talking all things Manchester United transfer news. Brilliant. Love having him on. One of my favourite journalists to interview here on the United Stand. Don't have a top favourite because I won't reveal it, but he's definitely up there with one of my favourites, and he had some really good news to share with us there surrounding that Manchester United can do deals this January. He said it. He said Manchester United can do deals, but a lot of it obviously does depend on the Rashford exit. That isn't as close as what some people may think. The Casemiro exit, which also isn't as close as some people may think, which is why Ruben Amorim is clearly not including them at all. Casemiro not getting off the bench, Kolo coming on before him, and Marcus Rashford not even seeing the squad, because he's clearly trying to push them out the door so he can bring his own players in. But look, everyone, I know there was some reports coming out as we're in that interview about Alejandro Garnacho and Napoli. I asked Ben about it, and Ben said the knowledge that he had, that Manchester United want way north of 50 million. That number isn't true. Manchester United want more than that. They're not actively pushing him out. But Napoli, if they do sell Kvaratskhelia, they might come in with that money to try and get Alejandro Garnacho. Then if they put in a serious bid, Manchester United will consider it. So it's at the early stages. Let's see what Napoli decide to do with the Alejandro Garnacho situation, whether they do decide to target him. But look, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the likes on the video as well. Keep hitting the like button for Ben. Gavin says, #Beth's new contract. I know Mainoo negotiating a new contract. Maybe I need to negotiate a new contract. Ben there speaking about an email landing in the inbox. I might have to go and check that after the show. But look, everyone, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.